Committee will come to order. Mr. Dingell, do you have an opening statement, sir?
Dispense with my opening statement. Thank you.
Very good. And that concludes the opening statements by members of the subcommittee. I call our first panel. On our first panel, we have Mr. Michael Taylor, Deputy Commissioner for Foods with the Food and Drug Administration. Accompanying him is Mr. Stephen Solomon, Assistant Commissioner for Compliance Policy at the Food and Drug Administration. Lisa Shams, am I saying that right? Shames, the Director of the Agriculture and Food Safety at the Government Accountability Office, and Ms. Jody Nudelman, Regional Inspector General for Evaluation and Inspections for the Health and Human Services Office of Inspector General. Welcome you all. It's the policy of this subcommittee to take all testimony under oath. Please be advised that you have the right under the rules of the House to be advised by counsel during your testimony. Do you wish to be represented by counsel? Everyone's shaking their head no, so I'll take it it's no. Please then raise your right hand, take the oath. Do you swear or affirm the testimony you're about to give to be the truth, the whole truth, nothing but truth, matter pending before this committee? Yes. Let the record reflect the witnesses replied in the affirmative. You are now under oath. We're going to begin with your opening statement of 5 minutes, please. If you would like to submit a longer statement for the record, it would be accepted. Mr. Taylor, shall we start with you? Yes, pull that up, hit that light on. Okay.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman, Ranking Member Burgess, and members of the subcommittee. I am pleased to be here today with my colleague, Dr. Stephen Solomon, and to have this chance to talk with the committee about FDA's food safety program. I also want to really thank you, Mr. Chairman, as well as Chairman Dingell, Chairman Waxman, and all the members of the committee for your leadership in passing the Food Safety Enhancement Act, which we do hope will soon go to conference with the bill now pending in the Senate. As you know, food safety is an important priority for the Obama administration. Soon after taking office, the President established a food safety working group, which brought together experts from all federal agencies with responsibilities related to food safety. In its July 2009 report, the working group recognized the challenges posed by a rapidly changing and globalized food supply and the need to shift our focus to preventing food safety problems throughout the system. The working group also recognized the importance of inspections, recommending that the government prioritize crucial inspection and enforcement activity, build on and enhance state and local food safety efforts, and utilize better data to guide these efforts and evaluate their outcomes. In August of 2009, Commissioner Margaret Hamburg created my office, the Office of Food, to lead a unified FDA foods program and to enhance FDA's ability to meet today's challenges in food safety. We recently launched the One Mission, One Program initiative, which involves over 100 experts from throughout FDA who are addressing topics crucial to the future success of the foods program and the implementation of the anticipated new legislation. This includes an inspection and compliance strategy group that is looking hard at the way we conduct inspections. FDA's food safety inspections have focused traditionally on identifying sanitation, manufacturing, and product contamination problems in food facilities and gathering evidence of regulatory violations for use in possible enforcement cases. These efforts have contributed significantly to food safety over the years, but the preventive control requirements and other new tools provided by H.R. 2749 would greatly enhance the ability of FDA investigators and FDA inspections to protect public health. We will, of course, continue to act to remove contaminated food from commerce, but our focus will shift from collecting evidence of food safety problems after they have occurred to ensuring that food companies are doing what is necessary to prevent problems in the first place. Our goal needs to be high rates of compliance with the prevention-oriented standards envisioned by H.R. 2749, and to achieve this, we envision our investigators conducting a wider array of inspection activities than is common today and targeting those activities in ways that get the maximum compliance and public health bang for the buck. The recent Office of Inspector General report on domestic inspections is a useful snapshot of FDA's food safety system as it has existed in recent years. OIG has identified areas of opportunity for enhancing FDA's enforcement authorities, and FDA has already addressed many of the issues noted in the report. For instance, improving the speed and predictability of follow-up to inspections and strengthening the agency's enforcement program are top agency goals. Last August, Commissioner Hamburg announced 6 initiatives to ensure that enforcement actions taken by the agency are swift, aggressive, and will have a positive impact on public health. FDA appreciates OIG's recognition of the gaps in the agency's inspectional authority, and we support their legislative recommendations. These include the use of civil monetary penalties for FDA and C Act violations related to food, and the authority provided in Section 106 of H.R. 2749 for routine access to all records bearing on whether a food may be in violation of the Act. The GAO report of September 2009 raised some important issues relating to the safety of imported food. The agency agrees with many of GAO's recommendations, and we are working to incorporate them into both short-term and long-term initiatives. The report looked at FDA's new PREDICT system for targeting import shipments. This technology, which is deployed in Los Angeles and New York, will improve import screening and targeting to better prevent the entry of unsafe foods and expedite the entry of non-violative foods. A pilot test of the prototype system showed that PREDICT works to target shipments that are more likely to be found violative when examined by FDA. FDA has encountered problems with rolling out PREDICT nationwide due to difficulties with incorporating it into the agency's outdated IT infrastructure, which is now undergoing major upgrades. These problems have delayed the full deployment of PREDICT, but we will continue to move forward as expeditiously as possible with a full rollout anticipated by the end of the year, and we will continue to evaluate and strengthen PREDICT as the project progresses. FDA was encouraged that GAO recognized the importance of new legislative authorities as a key to strengthening FDA's oversight of imported foods. In accordance with GAO's recommendations, FDA is working with Congress to obtain authority for civil money penalties and to require the use of a unique identifier by food facilities, both of which are provided by H.R. 2749. The House bill will provide other valuable tools for ensuring that importers reliably verify, and this is really important, reliably verify that the foods they import are produced in accordance and compliance with the same prevention-oriented standards that we would make applicable to foods produced in the United States. We all know that for our food safety system to be effective, prevention must begin at the point of production, not at the port of entry. Mr. Chairman, protecting our nation's food supply remains a top priority for FDA and the administration. We really are at an historic moment for food safety in the United States as we work collaboratively to improve our authorities, our practices, and our policies that will enable us to meet the food safety challenges of the 21st century. And we appreciate the support of this committee and look forward to working with you in the future. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Solomon, did you have anything to add? Ms. Shames, would you like the opening statement?
Yes, thank you.
Thank you.
Chairman Stupak, Ranking Member Burgess, and members of the subcommittee, I'm pleased to be here today to discuss FDA's oversight of imported food. Effective FDA oversight is critical to public health. About 60% of fresh fruits and vegetables and 80% of seafood are imported. My testimony today will focus on three key issues: FDA's overseas inspections of imported food, gaps in import enforcement, and statutory authorities that could further help FDA. First, regarding the inspections. The number of FDA's overseas inspections has fluctuated since 2001. As shown in Table 1, annual inspections range from 95 to 153 out of an estimated 189,000 foreign firms. These inspections were conducted in 56 countries, mostly in Mexico. FDA conducted 46 inspections in China during this time frame. To augment these inspections, FDA has opened offices in China, Costa Rica, and India, and plans to open more in Mexico, Chile, the Middle East, along with the European Union. In addition, PREDICT, a risk-based computer program, is to assist FDA inspectors flag higher-risk food shipments. As Mr. Taylor said, a pilot test of PREDICT was promising. PREDICT nearly doubled the percentage of field examinations that resulted in violations. However, FDA told us that PREDICT's nationwide rollout has been delayed, primarily because of technical problems. Second, we identified several gaps in enforcement that could allow food with safety violations to enter U.S. commerce. One gap is that FDA has limited authority to assess civil penalties on violators. Importers post a monetary bond for shipments to provide assurance that they meet U.S. requirements. However, even though the bond may be up to 3 times the value of the shipment, this sum may be negligible for a large importer. An unscrupulous importer may consider forfeiting the bond as a part of cost of doing business. FDA agreed with our recommendation that it seek authority to assess penalties. We note that H.R. 2749 provides for assessing penalties. A second gap is the lack of unique identification numbers. Importers get computer-generated ID numbers from FDA. Because importers may provide their names and addresses slightly differently for each shipment, multiple identifiers are generated. FDA officials told us that firms have, on average, 3 unique identifiers, and one firm had 75. In addition, foreign firms are to register with FDA and are assigned a registration number as well. FDA told us that there may be duplicate registration numbers as well. FDA agreed with our recommendation to pursue the use of specific identifiers. H.R. 2749 also provides for such a unique identifier system. A third gap is that FDA does not share product distribution lists with states during a food recall because the information is considered commercially confidential. State officials told us that without this information, they lose time removing recalled food from grocery shelves. FDA agreed with our recommendation to find ways to share information to the states. On a positive note, one gap we found appears to be resolved. We were told that FDA now receives the arrival time of imported food shipments. This can help FDA coordinate any further review for high-risk imports. Finally, we've made several recommendations that would help FDA improve food safety oversight. GAO has called for mandatory food recall authority. Currently, food recalls are voluntary, and FDA has no authority to compel companies to recall contaminated foods except for infant formula. Other government agencies that regulate other products, such as toys or car tires, have recall authority and have had to use it when companies did not cooperate. FDA should also strengthen its oversight of food ingredients determined to be generally recognized as safe, or GRAS. Companies may conclude a substance is GRAS without FDA's approval and even without its knowledge, because companies are not required to inform FDA. FDA generally agreed with our recommendation that it develop a strategy to require companies to provide basic information about their GRAS determinations, and in view of emerging science, to conduct reconsiderations of GRAS ingredients. We also recommended that FDA seek any statutory authority that the agency determines it needs to implement our recommendations. And lastly, FDA agreed with our recommendation that it seek authority to issue regulations for preventive controls for high-risk foods. As Mr. Taylor said, FDA already has regulations for preventive controls for seafood and juice, which require firms to analyze safety hazards and implement plans to address those hazards. FDA officials told us that issuing regulations for preventive controls might be one of the most important things that they can do to enhance the oversight of fresh produce. We note that H.R. 2749 contains provisions that addresses mandatory recall, GRAS ingredients, and preventive controls. In conclusion, a substantial volume of our food supply is imported. Our work has shown that FDA could strengthen its oversight of imported food and close gaps in its enforcement by assessing penalties, developing unique identifiers, and sharing information with state agencies. Additional statutory authorities to conduct a mandatory recall and to establish preventive controls could further help FDA's food safety. Mr. Chairman, this concludes my prepared statement. I'd be happy to answer any questions that you or other members of the subcommittee may have. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Noodleman, your opening.
Good afternoon, Chairman Stupak.
You may want to pull that a little closer so we can hear you.
Good afternoon, Chairman Stupak, Ranking Member Burgess, and other members of the subcommittee. I am Jody Noodleman, Regional Inspector General in New York for the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services Office of Inspector General. I appreciate the opportunity to appear before you today to discuss our most recent review of FDA's food inspections program. FDA's inspections are an important tool for ensuring food safety. Recent outbreaks, however, such as the salmonella outbreak caused by peanuts in 2009, have raised questions about FDA's inspection process and its ability to protect the nation's food supply. Our most recent review focused on FDA's inspections of domestic food facilities. In brief, our review found that more than half of food facilities went 5 or more years without an inspection. We also found that the number of FDA inspections is going down, even as the number of food facilities is going up. In 2004, FDA inspected over 17,000 facilities. In 2008, this number dropped to fewer than 15,000. The number of high-risk facilities inspected also declined during this time. If FDA does not routinely inspect food facilities, it cannot be sure that these facilities are complying with the law and that the food they handle is safe. Our review also found that FDA's inspectors are identifying fewer violations in food facilities. During an inspection, an inspector may find violations of FDA's regulations or laws. Based on the nature of the violations, he or she may assign the facility a classification. In the most severe cases, the inspector will assign the facility an OAI classification, which means official action is indicated. Between 2004 and 2008, the number of facilities that received OAI classifications dropped from about 600 to less than 300. Most commonly, facilities received OAI classifications for unsafe practices and unsanitary conditions in the facility. These classifications resulted from violations such as food not being adequately refrigerated or evidence of rodent infestations. We also found that nearly 3/4 of the facilities that received OAI classifications had a history of violations. Even more concerning, half of these facilities had been cited for the exact same violation in a prior inspection. Further, our report found that FDA did not always take swift and effective action to remedy the violations. When a facility receives an OAI, FDA should consider taking some type of regulatory action. In the year that we studied, FDA took regulatory action against 46% of the facilities that received OAIs. For the remaining, FDA either lowered the classification or took no regulatory action. Moreover, for 1/3 of the facilities with OAIs, FDA did not take additional steps to ensure that the violations were corrected. This means that FDA did not reinspect these facilities in a timely manner or review any other evidence to determine whether the violations were corrected. Based on these findings, we made 6 recommendations to FDA. We recommended that FDA increase the frequency of its inspections, especially its high-risk inspections, provide additional guidance about when to lower OAIs, take appropriate action against facilities with OAIs, ensure that violations are corrected, seek the authority to access facilities' records during an inspection, and finally, consider seeking the authority to impose civil penalties through administrative proceedings. In conclusion, our report identified significant weaknesses in FDA's inspections program. We found that many food facilities go without routine inspections. We also found that when FDA finds violations, it does not always take swift and effective action to ensure that the violations are remedied. Taken together, our findings demonstrate that more needs to be done to protect public health and to ensure that FDA has the necessary tools to keep food safe. This concludes my testimony. I welcome your questions.
Thank you, and thank you to all the witnesses for your testimony. And let me just apologize. We got tied up on the floor. I thought we'd be back by 3:15. It was about a half hour later. You never know what happens when you get to the floor. We'll now move to questions. Mr. Taylor, let me ask you this. The FDA announced a lettuce recall today. Freshway Foods is doing a voluntary recall of shredded romaine lettuce and with a use-on date by May 12th, or use-on or before May 12th. I guess 3 people has been hospitalized. In the trace back, do we have any idea of where that romaine's originating from?
Our understanding, based on the investigation so far, is it came from a production site in Arizona, in Yuma, Arizona, where this company had its growing operations. We don't know the cause of the contamination, but we do know that there was product contaminated, people got sick, and so this recall is highly appropriate to protect public health.
Is the lettuce strictly grown in Arizona, or is it mixed with lettuce from Mexico, as we've seen in the past?
Well, this is romaine that is grown just in Arizona, and it's sold to institutions in a bulk sort of form, is the general way in which this product is distributed. So,
if I remember correctly, when we were out to California, you were there with us, and we were doing some of the farming there. And I thought Arizona and California had a very good trace-back method, to almost tell from what field it came from. Would you care to comment on this in the matter of this case? Well,
in this case, once we had the company identified, there was not a problem getting back to the source of production.
Okay. So the production field produced right there, and you don't know if it's in machinery or whether it was the growing site?
Well, we don't know. Yes, we've not we are investigating, we're back at the farm investigating the cause, so that investigation goes on. But as you know, there can be multiple vectors, avenues for getting this kind of contamination into an open field where product is growing.
It was for romaine that was used by the May 12th. Today's May 6th. How long has this investigation been going on?
The first cases go back, the first onset of illness goes back to April 6th, but it's been only in the last week or 10 days that we became aware of this. There's that lag factor between people first becoming ill and it getting reported. We found yesterday a positive sample of lettuce, which really confirmed the epidemiological hypothesis that this product was responsible for the problem. So there was actually a very swift recall response once the evidence fell into place.
Yeah, I take it Freshway Foods been cooperative, no problems there.
Yes, they've worked closely and responded very quickly when the evidence came into place.
Ms. Shames, let me ask you this. I'm sorry, Ms. Noodleman. I'm looking at page 10 of your report. That's where you start with Table 1, food facilities inspected by the FDA, fiscal year 204 through 208. And I think you testified the average of the inspections were about 24% of all the places inspected, correct?
Yes, that's correct.
The one that struck me was in 2004, you had 59,305 facilities should be inspected. By 2008, it's grown to 67,819. If my math is correct, that's about 8,514 new facilities in less than 5 years. How is the FDA going to keep up with more and more facilities without the resources?
I think that's a good question. I mean, clearly we document the number of facilities has grown, and at the same time, the number of inspections has declined. I think the other important factor in this is the number of high-risk inspections that are completed, and that is one way to target resources and target.
Right. Well, if we jump to the next table, that's table number 2, which is the high-risk facilities inspected by the FDA, and again, through the same years, 04 to 08. You've had, again, more high-risk facilities come online, about 565, if my math is correct here. Number of inspections had actually dropped from 77% to 63%. Any correlation during that period of time from 04 to 08, how many inspectors did the FDA have? Did the number of inspectors go down?
That is correct, and that is one of the things that that FDA talked about in terms of the reason why there was a decline in the number of high-risk inspections as well as the number of overall inspections.
Well, let me go to your next chart.
Yeah.
On page 12. Again, number of inspections per facility between 04 and 08. I take it facilities inspected more than 3 times. It's 21% of them were probably the greater or high-risk foods.
I'm not positive about that.
Okay.
That doesn't make sense to me, but I'm not. I can look at that in a little bit more detail for you.
All right. Let me go to bottom of page 14. In your report, you said you're talking about the FDA OAI classifications refused to grant FDA officials access to their records. Most of the facilities had a history of violations, and you say the FDA does not have statutory authority to require food facilities to provide access to these records. Do you know if the FDA ever received those records in these 4 or 5 cases?
In the reports that we looked at, that was for 2008, and it just documented clearly the types of records that they did not receive. I don't know, and maybe FDA has a better.
Yeah, I was going to ask Mr. Taylor. Any comment on that? Do you know if they ever received those records?
We got what we felt was a satisfactory resolution, and Dr. Solomon can walk you through the details of each one. It varied from case to case, but whether in some cases we went ahead and got injunctions to solve the problem or took other forms of enforcement action, and if you'd like, we can put...
Sure, just quickly, if you could just tell us what would happen on those.
In one of those cases, we actually used the authority under the Bioterrorism Act of 414 to meet that threshold, to have to request those records. Obviously, that delayed us. In 2 of the other cases, we conducted an injunction in order to try and get those records and requesting others for it.
Injunction would stop them from doing what, shipping their product?
We were able to stop them from shipping product, and at the same time, we used that consent decree that was signed to go to the suppliers there and get the information
Okay.
that we needed to control the product.
So you went to the suppliers to find out what the facility was doing?
Correct. So
Okay.
these were longer processes
Sure.
that took us to try and get the records that were needed.
Okay. My time is up. Mr. Burgess for questions.
Just staying with that concept for a minute, Mr. Taylor, Mr. Solomon, on the food safety bill that we passed out of this committee that's now awaiting activity over in the Senate, there still is there's a provision for emergency recall, which I think you referenced, Mr. Solomon, as part of the bioterrorism defense, but still it's a voluntary recall under the bill that we passed. Is that your understanding as well?
We don't currently have mandatory recall authority, which is part of the Food Safety Enhancement Act.
And pending the passage of this or after the passage of this legislation, is that a deficiency that you feel will be corrected, or will you still be relying on the emergency provisions of the Bioterrorism Act to have that emergency provision?
We would use all the tools available, and we would use that mandatory recall authority if that was necessary in order to effectuate getting product removed from the market.
If I may add, the bill 2749 would also give us routine records access, so the company would be obligated to provide the records we need to conduct an investigation and to discover the problems and solve the problems.
Mr. Taylor, and congratulations on your new post.
Thank you, sir.
I think, I hope for you. How many people currently work in your office?
Well, in my immediate Office of Foods, it's a very small staff of it's about 15 people. But we really work within the overall foods program. There's the Center for Food Safety and Applied Nutrition, Center for Veterinary Medicine, and then the large field force. So, there are upwards of 5,000 people in the foods program. But this new office that the commissioner created is a small leadership office, essentially.
Do you plan on expanding it?
The immediate office
Yes.
will grow slightly, but the last thing we want to do is try to manage the program from the Office of Foods. We've got great management teams and people throughout the foods program in these organizations, and our job is to lead and to unify and elevate their work within the FDA.
So, when you just referenced the Center for Veterinary Medicine, those directors report to you as well?
Yes, sir. The director of the Center for Veterinary Medicine reports to me, as does the director of the Center for Food Safety and Applied Nutrition.
Do you, at this point, are you considering merging the Center for Food Safety as well as the Center for Veterinary Medicine?
We have no plans to merge the organizations. We're looking at how we manage this program in a unified way, and how we be sure that we're really able to empower the people in these organizations to accomplish the things they're setting out to accomplish. And so we're looking at how we manage the program, but we have no plan for mergers at this point.
Let me just ask you a couple of questions about PREDICT, since that has come up in your testimony and as well as the testimony of the GAO. It holds promise, correct?
Yes, sir.
But there were problems.
Yes.
And those problems were related to the status of the IT systems that are surrounding it?
Yes, sir. It really, and I'm not the IT expert on the case, but it's really a function of the aging IT infrastructure, the servers, the basic equipment that supports the IT system. And so what happened in lay terms is a combination of things. You put this whole new application onto the system, which put extra demand on the system, and it was happening at about the time that we have grown our field workforce. We've been able, with resources Congress has provided over the last couple of years, to hire additional inspectors and other people in our field force. So that combination of extra demands on an aging IT infrastructure resulted in slowdowns and some, servers going down, and just realized, the IT people realized that aging infrastructure could not support the new system. But again, with resources Congress has provided, we are making the investments to upgrade that infrastructure. So, that upgrade and the imperative to test that carefully and be sure that when we do implement, is pushing back implementation. But we hope to roll out PREDICT nationwide by the end of the year. That's our goal.
You anticipated my question, but I was going to ask you, you have developed a strategic plan for dealing with the deficiencies in the IT architecture?
Yes, sir. We've got upgrades are being made. It's being tested. we'll test the predict system again before we make it operational, but the IT folks are confident that we'll have the infrastructure to support this and, make it serve the function that we know it can, which will really be much better targeting of imports.
So when we have this hearing a year from now, you'll be able to report to me
I will be here.
satisfactorily that
Yes.
it's been up and running for 6 months and it's targeted and sent you in the right place. And
that's our absolute aspiration goal. We're working hard to achieve it, and we welcome coming back and giving that answer.
And you can understand the frustration of people who, we're requiring every physician's office across the country to make great investments in information technology, and our own FDA, which is our premier federal agency that handles 25 cents out of every federal dollar, at least domestically, has been unable to meet its own challenge. Clearly, we've got to get our own house in order before we can be too critical of other people who've been slow in that regard as well.
I understand.
Right. I'm going to yield back to the chairwoman.
Thank you, Mr. Burgess. The chair is now really honored to recognize our chairman emeritus, Mr. Dingell, for questions.
I commend you for the way you're presiding, and I thank you for being recognized. I want to begin by commending Chairman Stupak and the committee for this hearing, and I want to observe that this committee has completed a rather remarkable piece of legislation with regard to food safety that rests comfortably in the arms of the United States Senate. As my old daddy used to say, that's the place where good legislation goes to die. Regrettably, the points made by the witness on behalf of the GAO are very much on point. Her observation of the two statutory methods that need to be added to the arsenal of FDA are included in that legislation. I know this is going to sound a little hostile to the panel, but I want to begin by commending it. I want you to understand there's nothing hostile in these questions. But I want to lay the framework of understanding how the events about which we are surrounded affect what it is we're doing. And I'll start by observing that FDA in 2008 inspected 153 foreign food facilities out of 189,000 such facilities registered with FDA. That's, of course, only a small fraction of the, in fact, number of worldwide sources of foods imported to the United States. But we were able in each of those years, according to GAO, to investigate only a very small number of the massive number of exporters into the United States. I noted with regard to China, FDA conducted 46 inspections to China. China is one of the biggest exporters of food to the United States. I observed that that's a country which sends us melamine and milk products, mushrooms, vegetables, fish, shellfish, and other food products that are contaminated, adulterated, dirty, or filthy or adulterated. And frankly, again, the legislation to which we address ourselves sits over there in the Senate. That's a remarkable piece of legislation which came out of this committee unanimously with the full support of every single member, and the leadership of this subcommittee made it possible for that legislation to move because of the way Mr. Stupak and the members of the committee, including my colleagues on the minority side, worked very hard to see to it that this legislation had not only a proper flooring and support, but also a full justification. Now, having said these things, I'd like to make a quick observation, then a question. Since 2007, FDA has had 2 major outbreaks linked to peanut butter involving hundreds of illnesses and 9 deaths. That's out of about the 5,000 deaths that exist in this country. And now I'd like to address the types of enforcement action that have been taken against the companies. I would note that the GAO asserts that additional authority to routinely inspect records, detain foods, subject violators, civil penalties, subpoena witnesses to help stepped up enforcement efforts would be significantly helpful. Am I correct in that to my witnesses down there, particularly you, Commissioner, and you from the GAO?
Yes, sir. Those new authorities are crucial to our doing our job.
Now, I note FDA's budget anticipates hiring 129 new food and safety inspectors based on revenue from the registration and reinspection fees in H.R. 2749. What will happen, if you please, to its plans to hire these 129 new inspectors if those fees are not included in the bill that the President signs as they are in the budget?
We won't be able to hire those inspectors, and we need more inspection to ensure the safety of food.
And that means that the ongoing record of dismal ability to investigate or to inspect food processors will continue unabated.
Yes, sir.
Now, I note the Peanut Corporation of America recall, while it was still ongoing, one of the companies that received the PCA product, Wesco Fruit and Nut Company, refused FDA access to important safety records and refused to conduct a voluntary recall, and FDA seized the product of the company. Now, I note that we should address, in that instance, Food and Drug would be able, had the legislation been passed, to use the mandatory recall authority to remove products that are already on the market. Is that not so?
Yes, sir, that's correct.
Now, how would such mandatory recall authority result in a different outcome in the Wesco case?
Well, we could have directed that firm to recall that product, to stop distribution or withdraw the product from the market. We wouldn't have to have been in a lengthy discussion and then have to go to court and get a judicial intervention. We could have acted swiftly.
In other words,
with those.
all of this sawing of the air would have to go on while people were dying of bad peanut butter.
Again, if we're delayed in removing product from the market, people are at risk.
Now, following the outbreak and the recall first linked to tomatoes and later to jalapeno and serrano peppers, the Inspector General identified weaknesses in the current one-up, one-down traceability system, including bad record keeping, lack of access to records, and firms that didn't know about the requirements. Has FDA's experience in other outbreaks confirmed flaws in the one-up, one-down traceability?
Yes, sir. I mean, that requires a lot of shoe leather by FDA. It's a old-fashioned paper system, essentially, when we've got electronic alternative systems that the industry itself is developing that can get us this information much more quickly.
Now, how important is traceback in containing foodborne illness outbreaks?
Traceback is crucial. Once CDC identifies the food vehicle, we then need to be able to go back to the source of production so we can get to the root of the problem and contain it. So it's really crucial to public health, as well as to protecting the industry, to contain a problem so that the industry, its own business, won't be disrupted any more than need be.
You can protect honest men and women in the industry from unfair competition by scoundrels and rascals, but you can also protect them against unsafe materials that could enter into the products that they distribute. Isn't that
Yes,
right?
sir. That's exactly it.
Now, in your report, this is to Ms. Shames. In your report, you state CPB's computer system does not notify FDA when imported food shipments arrive at U.S. ports. It is extremely important that these two agencies coordinate when it comes to imported food. Do you agree with that?
We agree. We've been able to update that information, and CBP has told us that now it does give FDA the time of arrival, and this should help FDA in terms of coordinating its inspections.
What additional steps need to be taken by the administration to fully address this concern?
We feel that CBP should continue to work towards this effort to share time of arrival information with USDA. That part of our recommendation has not yet been implemented.
Thank you. Madam Chairman, you've been most kind to me with regard to the time. I yield back the balance.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I now recognize myself for 5 minutes of questions, and I want to ask a question about information sharing as well. I'd like, Ms. Shames, I'd like to ask you about GAO's finding that FDA does not always share product distribution information with state regulators during a recall. If food needs to be removed, FDA may not give state regulators important information like which grocery stores and warehouses received the recalled product. FDA's inadequate coordination with states means that states must duplicate FDA's efforts and track down the same information. You found that public health and I guess this is a quote, may be at risk during the time it takes for the states to independently track distribution information when a product is found to be contaminated. So my question, Ms. Shames, is FDA's limited provision of information to states during an outbreak seems illogical. So what is the agency's rationale for withholding that information?
FDA says that this information is commercially confidential. And while we recognize that, we still recognize the public need that the state agencies are often the ones that are actually going into the grocery stores and removing the contaminated product off of the shelf. What we recommended to FDA and what FDA agreed to is that they would explore ways to try to get comparable information to the state agencies. I should note that USDA, the Food Safety and Inspection Service, does give product name information to the states as a way of trying to expedite any recall.
Okay. So, Mr. Taylor, so you have agreed and you have the authority to share that information with the states?
We are able to share this information with state officers who are commissioned by FDA, and there's to some extent around the country, we've actually commissioned state officials to function as FDA officials, so we're able to do it to that extent. But we do have some legal constraints under the laws that govern disclosure of information. This is a strong feature of the legislation, H.R. 2749, that this committee has passed, and the House has passed, because it would explicitly authorize us to share information with state officials, with other organizations, when necessary to protect public health, and still protecting the confidences of companies, but getting the information in the hands of people who need it to protect public health. And we enthusiastically embrace that. We need that clear authority from Congress.
Okay, thank you. So you answered the rest of my question. My next question is on monetary bonds and civil penalties. I'm concerned that FDA may not have sufficient authority to keep an importer from violating food safety requirements. Under our current system, the importing company maintains control over their food shipments, but is not allowed to release them until FDA approves. Importers post a monetary bond with Customs and Border Protection to guarantee the product will meet all U.S. requirements, including those of FDA. At least that's how the system is supposed to work. But the GAO investigation found that FDA and Customs and Border Protection officials do not believe that the bonding system stops import firms from releasing their goods prior to FDA approval. GAO found that many brokers and importers expect that they will occasionally have to forfeit the monetary bond as part of the cost of doing business. So again, my question to you, Ms. Shames, is why is the current system of monetary bonds not a sufficient deterrent?
What we are seeking is for FDA to be able to assess the civil penalties to make it more of a deterrent for unscrupulous importers to try to do that.
Is the amount of the bond adequate as a deterrent, or does it need to?
FDA and CBP officials told us that they thought that the amount of the bond really was insufficient. And this is something that we reported in an earlier report back in 1998. So well over a decade ago, we were hearing this information from those agencies.
So in your testimony, you stated GAO recommends that the FDA commissioner seek authority from Congress to assess civil penalties. Can you elaborate, why does FDA need authority to assess the civil penalties?
Now it cannot do that. It relies on CBP for any enforcement actions. And giving FDA this authority, again, we feel would be a deterrent for any unscrupulous importers.
So, Mr. Taylor, if FDA could impose civil monetary penalties for violations of food safety requirements, would that assist FDA in its mission?
That would be a big help to create more accountability for importers. There's another very important feature of the legislation, though, that would require importers to register with us and to meet requirements for their own practices in order to stay registered, to stay in business as importers. So we would have also the authority to deregister an importer. So again, it's critical that we enhance the accountability of importers to play by the rules, essentially.
Is there authority needed to increase the amount of the bond as well? That would be a CBP.
Right.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah. Okay, I'm out of time. So are we going to have a second? Oh, you're back. Yes. I'll recognize Mr. Burgess, Dr. Burgess, for a second round of questioning.
Thank you. Let me Taylor, approximately 13 million shipments of food arrive in the U.S. every year from foreign producers, and of course the number is growing, as we've seen from all the graphs. There are numerous examples of foods that have been problematic. We've heard about the melamine in the milk and the problems with gluten, and some of our pet food contamination of a few years ago. You've opened some stations overseas. The FDA has opened some stations overseas. In addition to that, and first question is, have we opened enough? Have we done enough in that regard? And what other measures are we employing to increase or enforce lax safety standards in other countries?
Yeah. You know, I think it's going to take a combination of tools and efforts to ensure the safety of imports. Those foreign offices they're not inspection posts, but they are critical posts for gathering intelligence about what's happening in other countries, to explain our requirements to foreign governments and to foreign firms. But that's just one small piece of the toolkit. We do need to do more inspections overseas, but we also need to hold the importer accountable and see that they are policing their own supply chain and being able to provide real assurances to us, documented assurances that they're producing product overseas or sourcing their product from facilities that meet our standards. So it's going to take a combination of things, but it's all about building more accountability into the supply chain all the way back to the point of production.
And it would seem intuitive that the importer would want that accountability in the supply chain, because after all, if their products are felt to be unsafe when they get over here, their market share is going to suffer. But is the FDA working with the importers directly in a collaborative fashion, educational fashion, to try to get more accountability on that end?
We do work with the importer community. We've issued guidance to the community to the importer community on good importer practices that we think they should observe to meet that responsibility to offer food only that meets our standards. Some importers feel the accountability. They're part of a supply chain. The major processor here in this country might be the importer in some cases, but in other cases, importers don't have a stake in what happens to the food after it passes from them, and so they lack accountability. And so there's a real gap in the system, if we don't have systematic accountability on importers as a critical part of the safety assurance system.
So what can you do to impose that degree of accountability if it may not exist naturally as part of the marketplace?
We need the passage of H.R. 2749. That is one of the most critical elements of the legislation to define that accountability, to give us the authority to set the rules that the importers need to play by in order to provide an adequate assurance that the food that they're offering is meeting our standards. Again, backed up by our own ability to go inspect, backed up by what foreign governments are doing, backed up by a host of other of checks. But that importer accountability is really a linchpin of the system, and it's lacking now as a really enforceable matter. It's something we urge on the industry, but there's no legal requirement for the importer to really take that responsibility. They only run the risk that we'll send the food back, or they may get it into the country under a bond, and as a cost of doing business, some of them, unscrupulous, will make a decision to let the product go. So there's a lack of accountability in that part of the system that H.R. 2749 would directly address.
I've always felt that it really is necessary to have some sort of a stop button that you guys can push in a hurry if you need to, if we find that we have something coming in that we really shouldn't. Mr. Noodleman, let me just ask you a question, and I apologize if Chairman Stupak has already covered this. But in the report, it found in fiscal year 2007, the FDA took no regulatory action for 25% of facilities who received the OAI classification. Why would the FDA classify a facility as official action indicated rather than one of the lesser classifications and then take no action? What would be a possible, that seems counterintuitive to me, what would be a possible rationale for doing that?
Well, in some cases, if the facility agreed to take action or promised to take action, then they did not they did not take any further regulatory action. That was the most common response that we heard.
And then how is the follow-up for that overseen to ensure that indeed the voluntary action was taken and the problem was corrected?
Well, that's one of the things we found. In about 36% of the facilities, FDA didn't take any, didn't re-inspect to ensure that the correction was made, or look at any other evidence. So there's not always the follow-up.
So that's still inherently a weak spot that needs to be fixed.
Correct.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll yield back.
Mr. Dingle, did you have a question or two on the second round here, please?
Again, briefly upon your patience. And I want to thank you for your courtesy to me, and I also want to commend you for the series of hearings you've held on these matters, because they've made it possible for us to move forward in a very significant fashion to protect the people and to see that Food and Drug finally has the law and the resources it needs to do its business. Now, these questions for Ms. Noodleman. There are 226,373 foreign food facilities registered with FDA. When the Inspector General looked at the domestic facilities registered in 2009, it found 48% provide inaccurate information. 7% either failed to register or failed to cancel their registrations, and 5% created multiple registrations. Now, if domestic registrations are this prone to errors, in your opinion, how reliable is the list of foreign facility registrations?
The numbers that you cite are right on, and it would make, I think it's even more challenging for foreign facilities to have accurate information in the registry.
Now, what can be done to help FDA improve the accuracy of its registration lists? Obviously, more people. Obviously, more money. Obviously, more inspections. Obviously, a better computer system. Do they need, in addition to that, additional authority under law to do the things that need to be done to induce better cooperation from the people who are supposed to register? What has to be done, in your expert opinion?
I think there's a number of ways the FDA can improve the accuracy and the completeness of the information in the registry. We make a recommendation to FDA to consider seeking the authority to have facilities register on a more routine basis, and that would allow the facilities to provide updated information about the foods they handle and about contact information.
Thank you. Now, Mr. Taylor, do you have a comment you'd like to make?
Well, I think I think that suggestion that Ms. Noodleman made is an excellent one. I think the requirement to have a unique identifier is important, and I think the requirement for the importer, as part of good importer practices, to be able to vouch for the accuracy of the information, identifying the foreign sources of supply, the foreign facilities from which they're sourcing product for import. All of those, I think, would really improve the reliability of the registration list, and those are all addressed in the Food Safety Enhancement Act.
Now, Ms. James, you have talked about the ability to inspect. And in your very excellent study, you talked about the need for FDA to be able to do a better job of getting the cooperation of Homeland Security and other government agencies. How could that best be done? Could that best be done by having a memorandum of agreement between the agencies, between a memorandum of agreement required by congressional action, or by some other mechanism whereby we could see to it that these two very important agencies, or several very important agencies, talk to each other so that they're able to use the advantages that comes of having several different agencies enforcing different laws, but able to work together to address the problems that concern us. Now, what is your comment, please?
It will be a multifaceted solution to a very complicated problem, and I wish I could tell you that there would be a single step that could correct that. We found that at the working level that the relationships between FDA and CBP were oftentimes very cordial. that they were able to work around, for example, not getting the time of arrival information. But this was
Of course, that is a structural failure, is it not?
well, yes, in this case
And
it
that's,
was.
whose fault is that? The other agency, or is that the importer or the food broker, or who?
Well, there are many players that are involved in the oversight of food safety. FDA is one, and as you noted, CBP really is the first face for an importer. So one of the challenges that we identified is CBP's own computer system, that system...
Now, that's probably hopelessly out of date, as is the Social Security computer system.
Well, there are hardware changes that would have to be made, for example, for getting a unique identifier. This is something that FDA feels it needs. We have certainly identified that it's something that's very important, but CBP told us that it would be difficult for its current system to do it, and they really could not offer any sort of timeline of when that might be done. So it's structural in terms of the many agencies that are involved, but it also gets to the resources in terms of the computer systems that it has in place, as well as the people.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, again, thank you for your courtesy to me. And I want to remind everybody that you and this subcommittee have had tremendous leadership in this matter. And I want to remind everybody that this committee, working unanimously together in a bipartisan fashion, has set out legislation that would address the problems we now discuss today, which reside comfortably in the United States Senate. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Well, hopefully the Senate will move that legislation, get it to conference, and we can go from there. Let me ask Ms. Shames about the unique identifier. How can one firm have 75 different identifiers?
It can happen very inadvertently. When a company registers for an import shipment, it may identify itself one time as White Incorporated. The second time, the company might identify itself as White Company. So it is something that is done most of the time very innocently, but it means that there needs to be some sort of scrubbing of the list to make sure that each company has a single...
So the company enters its information on a computer website, so it's really the company that enters it, which would then give it a number.
That's right.
Which could be unique on something as simple as an address, different address.
Yes.
Does Custom Border Patrol use unique identifiers?
They do not. No, they also...
Shouldn't they actually have access to it at the same time? Shouldn't that company give it to Custom Border?
Ideally, FDA and CBP would have the same unique identifier. And
Ideally, but reality is they don't, right?
right.
Okay. If we would limit the number of ports that food could be imported into this country, would that help?
Well, that is an approach that USDA takes.
Right.
On
meat products.
Well, that only USDA-regulated imports come from food systems that are equivalent to ours, only through designated ports. USDA also goes and audits those countries to make sure that their systems are comparable or equivalent.
Well, is that something we should look at? I was going back to your chart number 1 that you had in here. You said 80% of our seafood comes from foreign sources. I think you said 60% of our fruits and vegetables, and they can come into basically any airport or any trucking location on our border, correct?
That's true, yes. Stakeholders that we've spoken to said that it would be difficult for FDA to really replicate the same system that USDA has because...
Well, I'm not saying replicate it, but shouldn't you limit the ports of entry? I mean, how can you control anything if every airport and every truck crossing is basically a port of entry for food or seafood?
Well, it's an approach that the European Union has taken to limit the ports for its risk-based foods. So it is, there are precedent for it.
Any comments on that, Mr. Taylor? On either unique identifiers or limit the number of ports?
Yeah, again, from just an ease of implementation by the regulatory agency, that's certainly advantages to that. I think
Sure.
the challenge we face is different from USDA is that we're dealing with a much larger array of commodities coming from a much larger number of countries. There's a huge volume of trade, and so I think there'd be big practical questions we'd have to to work through. I don't think anybody wants to disrupt the trade in food, but we need to be sure it's safe. And how do you do that? It's a really important question.
Well, let me ask you this then, Mr. Taylor. You mentioned the shipper's bond. What's the usual amount of a bond? Does it depend on the product and the value of the?
Typically 3 times the value of the shipment.
Okay. But you said many times a shipper will just forego the bond.
And again, our understanding is that some shippers, who have a large volume of business will,
Right.
Are willing to just take that chance of letting a product go out into commerce, even though it's still under bond, because, in the whole course of their business, they don't get caught very often, or they aren't, there's not a problem that requires, that product be brought back. And so, again, it's a cost of doing business for some of these firms. Which,
Well, should we make it higher?
well, I think you could try a higher bond. I mean, I think the civil penalty approach is one part of it. I think the importer accountability and the fact that an importer could lose its registration under the Food Safety Enhancement Act would be perhaps even stronger tools, to make them have really something at stake for playing by the rules. I mean, that's what we need to do.
Mr. Dingell pointed out, and I think we've all pointed out that, it's expensive to keep our food supply safe, and the agency needs inspectors, and I think GAO report says, about $16,000 per inspection at a food facility. And the IG said that, and I'm quoting now, the decline in inspection was largely due to the significant decline in staffing levels that resulted from cuts. In the legislation that we have pending in the Senate, the Food Safety Enhancement Act, we have an annual registration fee of $500. These fees would be devoted towards funding a variety of food safety activities. Any idea on what percentage would go towards inspectors?
Well, we would envision the fee revenue being used certainly to a significant degree to meet the inspection mandates, or to at least contribute to meeting the inspection mandates in the legislation. But we also have to invest those resources in the tools for the inspectors and the scientific basis for what they're doing. So it would be a mix of activities, and you could also contribute to the import oversight. So it'd be we distribute it across a mix of activities to meet the objectives of the statute.
Well, under the Obama administration, did you not receive a substantial increase in money for food safety in the last year?
The 2010 budget is an increase over 09, and there's a increase requested in 2011.
Well, have you hired more inspectors?
Yes, sir. The last 2 or 3 years of funding has enabled our field force to add 600 or 700 inspectors who are completing their training, and that we're going to be able to increase our inspections because of that in the coming years. So there has been that step up, through the increases we've gotten. It's not sufficient to meet the inspection mandate in the legislation, but it's a step in the right direction, which we appreciate.
Okay, Mr. Burgess, any questions?
Yeah, just following up on that last line from Mr. Stupak about the budget. Did the FDA receive any money from the stimulus bill or the big health care bill that we just passed?
No, there was some money that went into HHS for matters related to FDA, like a comparative effectiveness of pharmaceuticals, but there was not money that directly affects the foods program.
Did the Obama administration seek funding for the FDA in either one of these laws?
Yeah. Again, the stimulus money was about immediate projects that could stimulate economic activity in the near term, and so
Mr. Taylor, we gave $10 billion to NIH. Are you any less deserving than they are?
We would never say we're less
$10 billion to
Yes,
NIH.
sir.
Now, I love the guys at NIH, but you're important too.
Yes, sir, we agree with you.
Well, do you know why the administration didn't ask for additional funding for the FDA in either of these laws?
I'd have to get back to you on that. I don't personally, I wasn't involved in that.
Well,
process.
and it's all well and good to cite the Obama budget and what's great things are going to happen as a result of it, but we're not going to pass a budget on the floor of this House, I don't think, unless Mr. Stupak knows something that I don't know.
Wouldn't be the
And we're
first time you'd be wrong on
and
legislation.
certainly we are not going to do any appropriations bills before Election Day, so you're level funding till some omnibus in the lame duck session. So are you okay with that level of funding at this point?
Again, we're going to need additional resources to carry out the expectations of the Food Safety Enhancement Act. Again, that's why the fee provision in that, the registration fee provision in that law, that bill is very important to us. We do need a stable, predictable, and adequate level of resources to meet the mandates in the legislation.
Well, and I couldn't agree with you more, and that stable, predictable source of funds is not just true for you, but true for other agencies as well. But so far, we seem to be doing things in fits and starts, and you, in fact, got left out of the fits and starts, unfortunately. Mr. Chairman, you've been very indulgent. It's been a long day. I'm going to yield back the balance of my time.
Well, thanks, Mr. Burgess. And as Mr. Dingo has pointed out, you know, the Food Safety Act went through this committee 51-0, and we appreciate our colleagues on the Republican side of the aisle to help us provide a stable funding source for the FDA through that $500 per facility registration fee. That will provide the stable funding, so we do have the resources to get to it. It's not just resources, it's information sharing, and hopefully we can do that, whether it's Custom Border Patrol or we get the PREDICT program worked out a little bit more, so the high-risk foods we can identify. Well, thank you, and thank you to all of our witnesses. Sorry about the delay there on the floor for a while. We appreciate you staying with us and being here today. That concludes all questioning. I want to thank all of our witnesses for coming today and for your testimony. The rules of the committee provide that members have 10 days to submit additional questions for the record. That concludes our hearing. This meeting of the subcommittee is adjourned.